Humans have a love-hate relationship with change. We need it for growth and variety, and yet we hate the upheaval it brings into our lives. Resilience seems to be the answer. So let's explore a new kind of conversation where we look at the turbulence of change and the resilience that enables us to not only survive it, but to truly thrive from it. I'm Paula Shaw, life transition expert, grief counseling specialist, and author. I'll be spotlighting influential people on this podcast, people who have taken the steps to change it up. So join us as we share valuable information to help you navigate the rocky waters of change. Come on, jump on in. Welcome to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and oh boy, I say this every week, I know, but today especially, I am so glad you're here because we're going to be talking about a topic that I'm passionate about, something that I feel is so important for people to know about and to understand so that they can do whatever they can do to help others. So let's just get right into it. You know, I have to say, if someone were to ask me, who are the two groups in our population that I'm most passionate about, that I care most about helping, that it breaks my heart most when I see abuse of these two groups, it would be women and children. And we are going to be talking today about human trafficking. And it is a worldwide problem. Millions of people around the world are trafficked, including children. Many of you have probably heard about sex trafficking. And in that case, I'd like to think it was adults, but what I now know is no. A lot of times, these young women and young men are brought into this life at the age of 14, 15. And today, my guest is going to educate us about what it's really like to live through this and what it's like to survive this. But before I introduce her, let me tell you just a little bit that I have learned about human trafficking. So the means that traffickers use to keep somebody stuck in this lifetime are force, fraud, coercion, and for this is kind of a definition of human trafficking, that the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act is basically the definition of human trafficking. And it's a huge problem. Here in the United States, it's a huge problem. It's a problem all over the world. But even right here in San Diego, where I am, it's a big problem because we are a border city. And I think that so many of you who live in beautiful counties like San Diego think that this is just a problem of people in a low economic level or something that happens, maybe on the other side of the border. But one of the things I really want to stress to my listeners today, that is not true. It is happening in the most beautiful neighborhoods. It is happening in the highest economic levels. It is happening among all kinds of groups. And if you don't know the facts, if you don't know more about how this evolves and what creates it, then you or your child could become a victim. And my goal today is to really try to help with that education. So here are some other things I think you should know. The following methods can be used to lure victims into trafficking: violence, manipulation, false promises of well paying jobs, and romantic relationships. When I learned that so often young girls from 12 years of age up are often approached online, and then they meet these men who they think become their boyfriends. And then what ends up actually happening is that so called relationship becomes the tool through which they're manipulated. We're going to be talking a lot more about that with our guest, but I want to give you one more bit of information before we bring her in. Traffickers look for the following in their victims, in the targets that they're going to work to groom and to lure: psychological or emotional vulnerability. What 14 or 15-year-old isn't having some kind of problems with mom and dad, or some kind of problems at school? Maybe their self-confidence isn't in the right place. Maybe they don't feel like one of the gang, or they're having issues with their peers. And if they post about that, they can become targets for these traffickers. People who are going through economic hardship can become targets for traffickers. People with a lack of a social safety net, if they feel like an outsider, or they feel somehow defective, if there's no confidence or no social group to belong to, they can fall prey to traffickers. People in situations of natural disasters and places where there's political instability are the perfect targets for these traffickers. So now, I think to continue this discussion and bring you a perspective I can't bring you, because I'm just talking to you about facts and statistics right now. But my guest today, Marjorie Saylor, she's lived this nightmare. She is a survivor of human trafficking. And let me tell you just a little bit more about her. In 2017, she founded the Well Path. This is obviously after she was able to get out of being trafficked for both sex and labor. She founded the Well Path, which provided emergency shelter services to both male and female survivors across the United States for 5 years with her hotel voucher program. So she created a safe place for people to get away. And currently, she is the program director of Alabaster Jar Project's long-term shelter program and drop-in resource center. She is also board president of the Survivor Leader Network of San Diego, which advocates for legislation recommendations for victims of trafficking while working to mentor other survivors into leaders. So, our guest is a busy woman. She's a powerful woman, and she's got an amazing story. So, without keeping you waiting any longer, let me invite Marjorie Saylor to join us. Hi, Marjorie.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Mhm.
As I shared with our listeners in the very beginning, this is such an important topic to me. I first became aware of human trafficking because of a speaker that came to our Rotary Club. And then I got involved in the program Summer Steffen, our district attorney, had created to
Mhm.
go out into the schools and help to educate kids. But as I was saying, I just feel I have such a heart for women and children who get put in these situations. And so I'm grateful that you're willing to be with us today, Marjorie, and share your story. So, would you please maybe begin with telling us a little bit about your backstory, how you grew up, and how you became somebody that was targeted by a trafficker?
Certainly. Thank you. Yes. So, well, I think my story began right around the age of 5. Okay. We'll
Oh
start there.
my.
That's
Yeah.
that's where the vulnerabilities started to creep in or started to be built. Um, I remember, I was raised in a home of domestic violence. My mom was in a very abusive relationship with my stepfather. There was a lot of fear inside the home, a lot of anger. Um, my mom would just kind of she would be in denial about a lot of what was happening, and she would just check out. She would check out
Mhm.
during her making dinner, washing dishes, and she wasn't very there to protect us from
Mm,
or the sexual abuse that was happening with me and my brother and my sister as well,
mm,
at the hands of my stepfather. So there was just a lot of confusion, but at the same time, my mom's doing the best she knows how to do to raise
yeah,
us.
yeah.
She took us to church every Sunday, every Saturday morning, every Wednesday night, every Sunday night. We were in church a lot. You
Mm,
know, that was a safety net for me. That was my home away from home, because at home it didn't feel safe.
yeah, of
It didn't
course
feel
not.
like home. And I was homeschooled till up until about the age of 14. We were very
Mm,
secluded from the outside world, didn't know a whole lot about what was going on outside of what was happening inside of our home. Um, we were very, very poor. My stepfather had some mental health issues, and um, he wasn't able to hold jobs for long periods of time, so we were always
yes.
out. My mother would sew clothing for the women at the church, and that would get our grocery money. And the majority of the time, I remember, we had no running water, we didn't have a telephone,
Oh my
we had
god.
no electricity most of the time. We had, for heat, we had a potbelly stove in the
Mm,
dining in the den, and then we had an oil lamp for lighting the home at night. It was a small little trailer, but still,
mm,
that's what I remember from growing up. And I remember going to grocery stores, and we dressed very different from a lot of the people that we saw. And I remember feeling a lot of shame and just
mhm.
embarrassment. I felt very different. I felt very out, like an outsider, and
Yes.
but at the same time, I'm developing this really deep love for God, and for me,
Mhm,
that's my story. I'm very spiritual. I have a very deep love and understanding of a higher power, and that's that's what's gotten me through everything. But
mm.
for a while there, at the age of 5, that's when I began to develop that personal relationship with God.
You
And
know,
go ahead.
I I love hearing that, Marjorie, and yet I have worked with people over the years and who have been through different kinds of loss or abuse, because
Mhm.
in this whole season on our show, we're talking about different kinds of grief issues. And
Mhm.
sometimes when people go through loss and grief, and my God, everything you just described was huge loss and grief issues. Sometimes they get angry at God, or it's
Mhm.
why
Mhm.
God or why me? Did you not experience any of that?
I did. I did. So at the age of 5, started to develop that relationship with God outside of going to church. It was a very personal one-on-one connection with God.
Mhm.
And I held on to that. And I was praying daily for God to remove my stepfather
Yeah.
just to keep us safe, And I think
Mhm.
around the age of 8 or 9, nothing was happening. And I started to develop this bitterness inside,
Mhm.
and that kind of put a block. I still had a love for God, but I wasn't praying anymore. I wasn't experiencing, the dreams that I was having, um,
Yes.
more spiritual based, and around the age of 14, we finally were able to leave that situation, but only because my stepfather tried to kill my mom. And
Oh,
so we
God.
had to leave. My mom was finally forced to make a decision and get
Yes.
us out of that situation, and she did. And then I got angry even more because then I have to leave my church, that was the only home I knew where
Ah.
I felt safe. And so I had anger at God for answering the prayer, but in that way, you
Mhm.
know. And
Mhm.
and then we were living up in Orange County at my grandparents' house at the time, and I ended up uh, meeting one of the boys at my school. He was on the football team. He had me smoke some marijuana with him on my way home from school. I never knew what that was, but under the influence, and he took advantage of me and he raped me. And I
Oh.
felt at that time that for me was very, very crucial in what set me on my downward spiral in exploitation because of
Mhm.
that moment. It wasn't just the vulnerabilities that, I had grown up with. That was a very key moment for me because I believed the biggest lie that I told myself, that I was not worthy, that
Ah.
I was broken and
Mhm.
dirty, and
Mm.
I didn't know how to talk about it with my family. And
Mhm.
about a year, couple actually, it was more like a couple months later, I was 15 at the time, I ran away from home, and I ran away from God, and I ran into the arms of exploitation, and I was experienced several forms of exploitation. I was trafficked 3 different times for labor trafficking before the age of 18. By the
Mm.
time I was 18, I was working for a moving company, and I was being paid under the table. It still was not a legitimate, you know, work environment. But for me at that time, I felt like I was doing well. I was making a decent amount of money. I was
Mhm.
able to take care of myself. I wasn't being exploited, per se, by individuals. About 3 years into that job, I my boss was arrested for growing about $450,000 worth of illegal marijuana in one of the warehouses,
Ah.
and so I was without a job again. And at that point, I was so desperate to not be sleeping on people's couches and to, have safety and security, that I took whatever came my way. And the first
Mhm.
thing that came my way that was offered to me was a job as a waitress in a strip club in Santa Ana. And
Ah.
so I took that job, and I remember looking at the girls on the stage and thinking to myself, very judgmental, very critical, like I would never do that.
Mm.
That was my attitude towards that, and I was put off by it, but at
Mhm.
the same time, I needed to make a living, and I did pretty well, with my tips as a waitress. But
Uh-huh.
then, things happened where the business was being shut down because they were being sued by the city. There were several lawsuits, and the Honda dealership wanted the property, and they told us about a week before they were going to close the doors. And so, out of an act of desperation, I took my tips from that night and I went upstairs to the girls where they were getting dressed, and I bought some outfits, and I said, okay, well, I'm not going without. So, and I went to another club and I started dancing, and I did that for about a year.
Wow. Okay, you've got me on the edge of my seat, Marjorie. I did not know all of your story, and this is incredible. We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, let's pick it right up there and see what was the next progression in this journey that you went through in human trafficking. We'll be right back.
Is living in today's fast-paced world making you feel stressed and out of balance? Are anxiety, sleeplessness, depression, lack of focus, or weight gain robbing you of your relationship and your energy? If you're ready for change, you need to call Paula Shaw. Paula helps you identify and eliminate self-sabotaging thinking and behavior. Using a wide variety of mind-body techniques, she provides her clients with the most effective processes for their specific needs. To book a session with Paula, call 858-480-9234. That's 858-480-9234.
Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and with me today is Marjorie Saylor, who is a survivor of sex and labor trafficking, and she is sharing her amazing story with us. Today, her work is really all about helping people and helping other survivors, and we're going to be learning more about that. But in our last segment, Marjorie was giving us a really wonderful understanding of the evolution of how this happened to her. So, Marjorie, you were saying you what I found kind of interesting, you mentioned to us that you stood in judgment of the girls who were dancing at the strip club, but then at the end, you made a decision to go buy some outfits and start doing that yourself. Do you remember what your thought processes were or what prompted you to do it?
Yes, I do. I remember it was purely an act of desperation.
Ah,
I knew that I needed to keep the lifestyle that I had become accustomed to. I did not want to be homeless. I did not want to be,
mm,
um, you know, in need of food or anything. I
yeah.
wanted to be able to take care of myself in the way that I come accustomed to. I
Mhm.
never wanted to go back to that place of need that we were in as a child, you
Yeah.
know? And that was a big motivator for me. But also at the same time, you know, I had also in this process experienced several heartbreaks in relationally. And
Um,
just the sexual abuse I experienced as a child, a lot of that led me to be vulnerable to, well, to the idea that all I'm good for is what my body can offer, you
yes.
know? And then I'm watching this take place over a period of a couple years as I'm a waitress at this strip club. I'm watching all of this play out with other people and it's being normalized to me. But at
Mhm.
the same time, even though I'm standing in judgment, I'm thinking to myself, I would never ever do that. That was not the woman that I was raised to be. That was not the kind of woman I wanted to, or I saw myself as a child. What
Mhm.
I saw for myself and my future as a child was a wife and a mother. You know, that's what I wanted desperately for my life. I wanted to be a pastor's wife. You know, that was
Mhm.
my dream. And it was definitely not my dream to be displaying my body for a bunch of people that I have no idea who these people are, you know,
Mhm.
and just the emptiness that brings. So fast forward now, I'm dancing and I am drinking alcohol every time I need to get up on that stage because I couldn't do it without the alcohol. I
Yes.
had to numb the way it made me feel. About 6 months into that year of dancing, I wanted to die. I was so
Mm.
emotionally and spiritually bankrupt that I wanted to die. I did not want I was so empty, you know, and I couldn't see myself as anything more. And I
Mm.
couldn't believe how I got there. I would just remember
Mhm.
just asking myself, how did I get here? How did I get here? Sitting on this strip club floor, picking up dollar bills, trying to piece back the pieces of this broken heart, trying to
Mhm.
hold it together, you know, trying to continue, trying to put on that face that everything is okay, that this is what I want, that this is what I choose, because it's a choice of no other choices at this point.
Yes.
I'm fully trapped in this life. You know,
Marjorie, can I stop you for a minute there because it brings up a question that I think so many people ask. Excuse me. Was it this feeling that you didn't have any other choices, that there was no other way to make a living, or was it that you didn't think you had the value or the worth to seek any other way to make a living?
I was misguided in my thoughts because I thought at the time I didn't have I had no record of any real work.
Mhm.
Anything that I did was either under the table or labor trafficking, right? And
Uh-huh.
so I had no real record of work history. I needed to make a certain amount of money. I had no real, I did try to go to college a couple times throughout this process,
Mhm.
didn't do well. Um, didn't even graduate high school. So for me, I was feeling like, well, this is all I can do at this point. I have
Right, right. Mhm.
progressed down this downward spiral. This,
Mhm.
it was not a career for me. It was something I felt like I ended up in, and I felt trapped there. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I was also telling myself that I was empowered in it because I had to tell myself that in order for it to be okay. um,
Mm.
I had to tell myself this is what I wanted. I told my family, I told everybody, this is what I choose. I'm empowered in this. I get to say who, what, when, and where, and how much, you know?
Yes.
In that process, that's when I experienced sex trafficking. It was a very brief experience with sex trafficking. It was the security at the club and a law enforcement officer. And I'm not going to get into the details of it. It was a very short period, but for
Mhm.
me, I almost lost my life. I was left for dead through that experience.
Oh.
Um, I that was the experience that I needed to get me out of that. So after I walked away from that, I completely walked away from the adult industry. I wanted nothing more to do with that and moved forward trying to better myself. And I started my own business, working, doing dog walks and pet sitting and things like that for a
Mhm.
while until I met my daughter's father and I was labor trafficked again, um, through his criminal enterprise. And
Oh.
so I was, fast forward, now I'm 30 years old, I'm pregnant, and I'm 6 months pregnant. And I'm just looking at my life and I'm thinking, I am never going to get away from exploitation. I'm never going to get away from abuse. I am being beat physically. I'm being forced to use drugs. Um, I was so broken, and I couldn't imagine having my daughter in this world. I couldn't
Mhm.
imagine having a child in this lifestyle, and I couldn't imagine not having my child either. And so for me, the only thing that I could think of to do that made sense was to take my life, and I tried to take my life.
Oh,
That
no.
was not the plan God had for my life,
Mhm.
and I was unsuccessful in that. But that was the first time in 17 years that I called out to God and I said, God, if you're there, if you're out there, if you're really there, if you're real, protect this child inside of me. I said, if you give me a healthy child, I will give her to you. And I bargained with God that day, but for her, for my daughter's
Mhm.
sake. So fast forward again, I don't know how I made it through the next few months, but she was born a week overdue. She was perfectly healthy. There was nothing wrong with her, nothing,
Mm.
no effects of the drugs or the abuse to my body, nothing. She was perfectly healthy. And
Mm.
when I looked into her eyes for the first time, I realized what love was for the first time in my life,
Mm.
what love
Wow.
looked like here on earth, and
Mhm.
that sense of love just sprang up in me for her. And I made a promise to her, I will never let anyone hurt you. It still took a while. She was 11 months old when I was finally able to leave the abusive situation that I was in. But it would, if it wasn't for her, I don't even want to know where I would be. I would be maybe dead today, you know?
Mhm.
But I remember like yesterday, I was sprawled out on the ground. The front door was open. I was in front of the front door. He was on top of me with his fists flying. She was standing next to me, crying. She was screaming, "Mommy, mommy." And that was the first time that she had reacted this way to this abuse happening to me. And
Uh-huh.
so in that moment, I couldn't feel the pain of the blows anymore. All I could see was her. All I could think about was her and how to protect her. And I remember it took about 3 days to get away. But I had determined in that moment, I determined that I was getting out of this somehow, some way. And I found an opportunity to escape, and I grabbed her and the things that I'd been putting aside for us and ran out the door. By the time I got her buckled in her car seat and in the driver's seat of the car, he was running out the door. And I just, I was so paralyzed with fear, but I'm backing out the driveway, the windows down, the driver's side, and I'm driving away to the rest of our life, you know?
Oh
And
my God.
that moment, the air's coming in, and, it just felt kind of like a defibrillator to the heart. That was what the air was to my lungs, like I could finally breathe again. It was just that overwhelming feeling of relief and
Yes.
freedom. I was finally free, and I remember looking back at my daughter through the rearview mirror and just telling her, "Mom is home. Mom is home, baby girl." And yeah, that was the rest is history. I had him arrested and
Mm,
filed a restraining order, and about it, dove into Bible study at my grandmother's church for about a year, got spiritual healing, and
mm.
then got the call to do something with my past. God called me to this work. And so 20,
Wow.
20 yeah, 2014, I started getting involved in any way that I could, sharing my story, educating the community, educating law enforcement, and
Mhm.
and doing the work that I'm doing now.
Marjorie, I'm so moved by your story. Um, there's so many things I want to ask you about, but I think this is a great place for us to take a quick break. And when we come back, let's talk about now that you are free, what were the steps that you were able to take and how were you able to move forward with your life? We'll be right back. Paula Shaw here. I'm thrilled that LifeWave phototherapy patches, which use no drugs or chemicals, have become a part of my life and my business. My family and I all use their wearable patch technology, and the results are life-changing. My parents in their 90s used the X39 patch, which activates stem cells, reverses aging, and improves the function of every area of the brain. I love X39 because I can work out with the 30-year-olds with no problem. And it's erased my fine lines and given my skin a youthful glow. LifeWave patches use a patented form of phototherapy, frequencies of light, to safely boost health and wellness at the cellular level. No drugs. To learn more, go to my website, lifewave.com/safe health. That's lifewave.com/safe health. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I am your host, Paula Shaw, and with me today is survivor of sex and labor trafficking, Marjorie Saylor, who, if you are just joining us, you're definitely going to want to go back and hear this show from the beginning because she has shared an incredible story with us of her life and the evolution of what happened to her. And Marjorie, just one thing I want to ask you before we go forward with the incredible things you're doing now. You talked about being in the abusive situation yourself, being physically abused, being trafficked. And I think so many people who hear a story like this say, why didn't she leave? Why didn't she get out? So let's use this moment to help people understand why you and why so many other women who are in this kind of life don't get out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. And sometimes it's hard to explain. And I think for myself, I was so broken. I was so mentally broken by my captor. And in the beginning when I met my last abuser, because when I met him, I had been working on myself. I had been working to create, I was a productive member of society. I had my own business. I was volunteering for political campaigns that were meaningful to me, and I was doing everything I could to change that vulnerable person that I was. But I
Mhm.
hadn't gotten any heart healing. I hadn't gotten any spiritual healing. And I was still very vulnerable to exploitation. And I fell back into it. And you know, by the time it was maybe a month into this experience, and I realized the person I was with was another monster. And I
Mhm.
had made another mistake yet again. And uh, I tried to leave. When I tried to leave, my family was threatened. And I
Oh.
stayed out of fear. I stayed out of fear. I wasn't held in handcuffs or chains and tied up with rope. That's not what it looked like for me. And that's not what it looks like for many people. What it looks like is it's a mental kidnap. And it
Mm.
is, I stayed out of fear. And then towards, in this 2 years of this last experience, there were many times that I could have left,
Mhm.
but I chose to stay because at this point, I didn't see my own worth. I didn't see my own value. I felt helpless without this person. I felt
Mhm.
incapable. He had broken me down mentally so much that I felt like I couldn't survive without him. But at the same time, I couldn't be, I wanted to take my life and I tried because I
Yeah.
was so miserable living in this and I couldn't see a way out and I wanted a way out. That's why a lot of people stay. A lot of people stay for other reasons too. They're financially dependent. I was financially dependent.
Yeah.
There are so many things that are held over people's heads to get them to stay, and it's all manipulation and coercion.
And I was talking earlier in the show about young teenage girls. And I know oftentimes in the grooming process or after they start being used and trafficked, pictures are taken that they hold over their head, threaten them that they'll expose to family or on social media. But I think the point you're making about how you feel about yourself emotionally and psychologically, that probably is the biggest weapon that the
Mhm.
trafficker holds, because when you've helped us so beautifully understand how you, when you see yourself as broken, when you see yourself as having no value, then what is there to fight for? What is there to flee for? Why get free? Because you don't see that there's any other possibility. And I think it's hard for people who've never been in anything like that to imagine what it's like to have so little love for yourself and so little sense of self worth that you can actually be there.
Mhm.
But what you've shared, Marjorie, I think has really helped people to see and understand on a new level now. So I thank you so much for your willingness to share your story, which not only are you doing with us today, but you do as part of your work now, as part of who you are now. So I think, first of all, and I also wanted to say, I loved the part of your story when you looked in the rearview mirror and saw your daughter in the back seat and the air was coming into the car and you had that sense of, I'm free. And
Mhm.
what I do now, I'm going to do for her and I'm going to do to make my life better. What an incredible moment. Powerful moment.
Yeah, that was the day that I broke the cycle of abuse in my life.
Ah. And tell us a little bit exactly what that means, breaking the cycle of abuse.
So I finally found in myself purpose. I found enough purpose in myself as my daughter's mother to do whatever it took to prevent myself from ever being in a situation that vulnerable, in a situation of abuse like that, in
Mm-hmm.
order to protect my daughter. Now, granted, the motivation came for her, not for me. It was for her in the
Yes.
beginning. That was the motivation I needed to protect her, to keep her safe, to provide a life for her where she wouldn't be ever, where she would never experience the things that I had experienced.
Yes.
I was going to have a different life, and I determined within myself that I was going to do whatever it took to get there. And that also meant not doing anything where I'm re-exploiting myself in order to make that happen. I'm not,
Yes.
you know, and so people use that excuse in the adult industry where I'm just trying to feed my kids. I'm just trying to live, I know there is another way. And I was determined to find another way. And so for me, what that looked like was diving back into my spiritual healing,
Mm-hmm.
diving back into a walk with God, going back to church, and about a year I got really deeply in that spiritual healing component. And
Did,
um
did you get any help from people or from any of the services out there? How did you get on your own 2 feet?
So I was very, very fortunate. A lot of people can't say this, and that they have family support. I left my family for many reasons,
Mhm.
but but when I was free, I came back and I reconnected with my grandparents. My grandparents supported me providing housing. They provided shelter, a
Wow.
roof over my head for me and my daughter. A lot of people can't say that they would have had that opportunity.
Yes.
I was provided with that. Otherwise, I would have had to be in a shelter. I would have had to look for some other means for me and my daughter to get through.
Yes.
But aside from that, I went to food pantries. I went to resource centers. I everything that and county assistance. I was on welfare for a couple years, all the way through college, through finishing my degree, and I found every resource that I could find to, scholarships, diapers, formula, like everything that I needed. I
Mm.
found through being resourceful, and I
Wow.
made it through.
Wow. And that, in a way, was sort of the precursor of Alabaster Jar and what you do to help women today. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes. So through my studies, I went to college for psychology. I wanted to, I got the call. So backtrack a little bit. I got the call a year into my Bible study to do something with my past. Didn't know
Uh-huh.
what. I said no. I don't want to do that. I just want to let's move on and forget this happened and just create a
Right.
life for my daughter. At through church, I went to a Just conference and heard another survivor share her story, and
Ah.
then I realized that I wasn't the only one that this had happened to.
Mhm.
And I realized that, okay, if she can do that, so can I. And so I connected with her, got connected with Runaway Girl Incorporated, started being educated on how to teach and educate the community and law enforcement. I started doing that with them. I educated delegates from around the world in response and protocol. I've been able to speak internationally and share this information and educate people. 2014, I'm in school. At the same time, I'm doing this work. Had joined the Survivor Leader Network, started building that up, and in 2015, that's when I started working with Alabaster Jar Project in the capacity of doing direct services, providing a peer support group. And that's what I was going to school for. I wanted to do something like that on the counseling side.
Mhm.
Um, and it just, I said yes to God, and He just opened all those doors. And one thing led to another. In that process, I started my emergency program until there wasn't that much of a need for it for me. Last year, I did close it down because I'm moving more in the legislative direction, um, because of policies that have been coming up as of late, and a lot of changes. I feel like I can be more impactful that way. However, I'm still providing that program development for this current program where we house other women. And it's been such a blessing to watch them grow and see hope again and see opportunity and be able to come out of that mindset that I was in
Mhm.
and be able to come into their hope and their purpose. And it has been such a blessing to be able to provide that.
Marjorie, I think you're an incredible blessing. I've had goosebumps the whole time we're talking, because your story is, in a way, it's something like we would see in a movie, and it's so beautiful that there's this happy ending, this incredible ending. You went to school, you got your college degree, you're doing all this incredible work now to help other survivors. um, it's just got to be so gratifying for you to be able to be where you are now.
I would have never saw myself where I am now
Mm,
back then.
yeah.
So it
And
is,
I
yeah.
have a feeling all the listeners and viewers are dying to know, how is your daughter, and how is she, and what's she up to today?
She's incredible. She
Uh,
is um she is my reason for, like I said, for everything I'm doing. Uh,
mhm.
she is in school, she's in gymnastics, she's competing in gymnastics.
Oh, wow.
She has the interest to become a scientist and something also along the lines of a world famous gymnast is what she said. She, so
Love that.
she's very
Scientist or
motivated.
gymnast, or
Yeah,
both.
she's very motivated and she has a love for life
Mm.
and she is funny and it's so great to laugh with her and just to be her mom. It's such
Oh,
a
Marjorie.
constant reminder every
Mhm.
single day.
Mhm. So
Yeah.
she was your inspiration to change your life, but wow, what a beautiful one you've given her. It's so incredible. And before we run out of time, I really would love you to talk a little bit about your work in trying to change legislation, because I was appalled to learn at the event that you and I kind of co-facilitated at One Safe Place that the penalties for traffickers are ridiculous, like very, very small penalties on par with traffic penalties, traffic citations, and that kind of thing. So please tell us a little bit about that, and what is the work you're trying to accomplish now in changing legislation?
Yes, thank you. So right now, a buyer, it's like a slap on the wrist, maybe $200-300 fine. They might have to do a prostitution impact panel where they're sitting for a couple hours getting information about what the vulnerabilities are in it, and it's not enough. What I want to see is at least a 10-week class for these buyers. I want to see higher increase in fines for them, maybe even towing their cars, their vehicles, maybe even putting their faces in the newspaper, things that would deter them from purchasing human bodies. Um,
Yes,
this, you know, if there was no demand, we wouldn't have the issue of human trafficking.
exactly.
So
Exactly.
how do we deal with that? Right now, I don't feel like there's much of an appetite to deal with the demand, especially here in California, but just across the US in general. There is a model out of Sweden called the Nordic model that works very well to do this. It holds buyers and traffickers accountable while decriminalizing the act of selling for the one who's out there, the prostituted individual, the one who's vulnerable. They recognize that they are victims and they try to provide exit strategies and a way out of that
Mhm.
life via their choice. And but they hold buyers and traffickers accountable. So here in the US, we have a model that's similar that we're calling the equality model. And
Mhm.
I try to push that with another organization called World Without Exploitation, along with the
Mm.
support of Alabaster Jar Project. And we promote that legislation. So here in California, SB 357 was just passed in January. It fully decriminalizes the act of loitering for the purposes of prostitution. So anyone out there on the street, the pimps, the buyers, the girls, it's all they can loiter for that purpose. Law enforcement can't do anything. So now what we're seeing as a result of that is we are seeing prostitution in front of schools, in front of
Oh,
homes.
no.
We are seeing this all across San Diego, uh, LA, San Francisco, um, and Oakland, to be more specific. So we have a serious problem as a result of SB 357. I
Mm.
fought that bill for a year and a half. Met with the governor's office. We've fought really, really hard. Uh, it's still illegal for prostitution is still illegal. However, it's a sneaky way around that law. And now we're working to try to repeal it or undo it. And there's another piece of legislation that we were working on as well. It's SB 14, and that increases. So right now, if you traffic a minor, it's a non-violent felony here in the state of California.
Ah.
Non-violent felony, right?
Mhm.
SB 14, it becomes a serious felony, and they would have to do at least 80% of their sentence rather than the current 50% that they do now. And they would have to register as a sex offender. And if someone was found as a victim trafficker, someone who was forced to traffic other people, a bottom, a recruiter, which we see a lot of, they would be given the opportunity to have a full vacatur of their record and not be held liable for what they were also being. They were also a victim in themselves. So
And the
that's
penalties that you just described would be for the traffickers?
correct.
Great. Oh,
Yeah.
good. And
So
what
that's
is this law, and what can people do if they wanna help you to get this to happen?
So right now, this is very crucial because SB 14, tomorrow morning, it's in Appropriations Committee. We want to call your committee members in the Appropriations Committee and ask them all to vote it out of suspense because it's currently in the suspense file in Appropriations. We want to vote it out of suspense and get it on the Senate floor. It's been passed through the Public Health and Safety Committee in the Senate, but it needs to reach the full Senate floor, and it will do that in early June. So another opportunity, call your senators and tell them that you want SB 14 to pass. You want them to pass SB 14. That's really
All
what we
right.
in
So we
California.
want SB 14 to pass.
Correct.
All right, that's great and that's clear. And Marjorie, this time has just gone by way too fast. But if people want to learn more, if they want to reach out to you, or if they want to donate to Alabaster Jar, which is a residential facility, correct?
Yes.
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 So how do they reach you? What are the best ways?
Okay, so they can reach us on alabasterjarproject.org. There's volunteer opportunities there. There's donate opportunities there. My information is Marjorie at alabasterjarproject.org.
Okay. And what we really want everybody to remember is what Marjorie just said to us. Call your senators, start talking to people. We need to pass SB 14. Is that the correct
Correct.
number? Yes.
Yes.
SB 14. And Marjorie, I know you've done a lot of speaking all over the world. You've done a lot of interviews. I'm so grateful and blessed that you gave us your time today. And in ending this interview, is there anything you would like to say, either to others who are being sex trafficked or others who might help in this march to change legislation? Anything you'd like to say? I'd like to just give you some time right now.
Yeah, I just want to say, search your heart. Search your heart for those who are out there oppressed. Ask yourself, how did they get there? Instead of, having that judgmental view like I had, right?
Yes.
That's one way that we can start. Talk about this amongst yourselves. Unnormalize this behavior. Our society has played such a huge role in normalizing OnlyFans and the adult industry and pimping it, like pimp my ride, pimp my backyard, all that. It normalizes this, and we are up against that. That's what we're up against. So start having those conversations, start rethinking how we look at things and what we accept as okay. And for those of you who are out there in the life still thinking this is your only option, honey, you are worth so much more. You are of high value. You deserve to be treated well. Choose different, because there are other choices and there are other ways. And as you can see,
Marjorie, all I can say is thank you so much for who you are and for everything you're doing and for all you just said. And thank you to our listeners and viewers for being with us today. Please share this show. Talk to people. Let's get awareness happening on a whole much, much bigger level so that we can get change that really matters, that can help people who really need it. All right. We'll see you again next week. Thank you for being with us on Change It Up Radio. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining me on Change It Up Radio. I hope you found this episode informative and entertaining. If you want to hear past shows or you want to get information on being a guest or a sponsor of this show, go to changeitupradio.com. We all know that change is inevitable and it's necessary, but darn it, it's also tricky. My goal is to help you make the experience of change smoother and more productive. If you've benefited from this show, please subscribe to it, share it, and review it. That helps me to tune into what you really want to hear and what you really want to learn more about. Remember, you can find us on every major podcast platform and also on YouTube, Facebook, Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. We look forward to seeing you next week for Change It Up Radio.